We have just started patch 10.1.5. We are only a couple of days into the new patch, so we are not yet going into what is changing, what are the new things we can notice from this patch. I'm sure many of you have started to notice some specs, for example, doing significantly better. You must have seen way more mages, both fire and frost in your keys, for example, even more guardian druids becoming more and more popular. But for today, we are limiting our attention to Augmentation Evoker. We're also not talking about how OP Augmentation Evoker is or whatever. We're talking about something different. We're talking about this. And what that is what we touched when we went over the interview from the devs for 10.1.5, the decision of Blizzard for the first time to divide the way you are going to be looking at the damage done whenever there is an Augmentation Evoker in your party or your raid. Up to this point, pretty much all the time, what damage you see in your in-game damage meters, whatever it is, details, or if you're playing from 10 years ago and you're using SCADA, or if you're playing from 15 years ago and you're using Recount, that is one kind of looking at the performance in the game. And then there is the other kind, the second one, which is the logs, the ones you get to look at after the fight, after the key, after a wipe in the raid, etc, etc. So Blizzard decided to split the way the damage done by Augmentation Evoker is going to look like, because Evoker is our first support spec. As they pointed out, they were planning to balance augmentation around 70-ish% of the damage they do being in the form of buffs to the rest of the party. Because of that reason, because the amount of damage they give out is so large, they wanted to still give you a way to effectively see how much damage you're doing, how much you're contributing as an Augmentation Evoker, to see, for example, how you could improve. You know, is my uptime of Ebon Might the same as the better Augmentation Evoker players? Should I change my prescience targets compared to what other evokers are doing, etc, etc? You can still look this up on the logs outside of the game. But in-game, you get to see none of this. In-game, you essentially just get to see how much you have buffed the rest of the party. So this has created a significant split where in one case you have the Augmentation Evoker in the logs outside of the game being somewhat even, somewhat close to the better DPS. And then you have the other case in game where the Augmentation Evoker will be doing less damage than the healer. So this has started to split the community in terms of the reaction on how this feels. On both ends, both for the Augmentation Evoker players, but also for the players who get buffed by the Augmentation Evoker. I'm sure there are many players who have been quite excited all of a sudden to go from the last patch to this patch, where their spec wasn't even necessarily changed. Let's say, you know, an Unholy Death Knight, for example, who wasn't really changed by the balance tuning. He used to do 230,000 DPS doing a big pack in Mythic Plus, and then they join a key with an Augmentation Evoker and suddenly their damage is 370,000 DPS in the same pack of mobs. That type of feeling has been quite welcomed by many players. They enjoy seeing bigger numbers for themselves, so it's something they enjoy. However, there is also the part of the player base who does not quite like this, even if they are the DPS players who are getting buffed by the Augmentation Evoker, because effectively it's fake damage. It's not damage they are doing, it's not damage they are contributing to. So it makes it harder for you to realize or to understand how well you are doing in the key, because now a lot of your damage will be mixed with the damage of the Augmentation Evoker. So am I doing the damage I should be doing? Am I doing better? Am I doing worse? How much is the skill level of the Augmentation Evoker I'm with impacting how much damage should I be doing? Am I going to feel worse if I run, let's say, 3 or 4 keys with some Augmentation Evokers, see that they can bump up my damage to be roughly 200,000 DPS over the course of a key, and then I join another key with a different evoker and suddenly my damage is 180,000 DPS, and I can't do anything about it. It's not in my control to increase that damage anymore because I'm just at the mercy of the damage that the Augmentation Evoker is buffing me with. That is another point that some players have pointed out that is going to frustrate some of the DPS players in groups with Augmentation Evokers. The same concept goes for Evoker players. Some Evokers are happy because, my style, my theme of the spec is to be a support. So I don't care too much for damage. I like to see being able to give big numbers to the other DPS in my group, even to the tank and to the healer. Bigger numbers that you would normally not see in a Mythic Plus key being done by those specs. So that might feel rewarding. It might feel satisfying as an Evoker to give out all of those buffs and see the damage in those buffs being reflected on the other players. But then you have the other chunk of Evoker players who, at the end of the day, I worked a lot in this key. I thought I gave out my buffs quite nicely and I spread my cooldowns quite evenly, and yet my damage is lower than the healer. So being able to notice, being able to see how well I have been doing in the key is effectively now impossible, because how much damage have I given them? How much damage should have I been able to give them if I played very well? How much of my augmentation damage has been impacted by them playing badly, for example? I was giga buffing this fire mage, but then this fire mage messed up his entire rotation and did much less damage. So in return, I did less damage as an augmentation evoker. I figure this is likely worse in Mythic Plus, because in the raid, especially if you are at a competitive level, you will very likely be live logging on Warcraft logs. You will very likely, keep an eye out on for the logs every wipe, every pull. You will get to check the logs, so you will see how the evoker is doing much more clearly in a raid. Even if in-game, even if as you are doing the pull of the boss, you see the damage meter without the actual damage showing of the evoker, you will see it in the logs, and when it comes to raiding, you check logs enough. Where I see this being much more of an issue is going to be in Mythic Plus. I have already been seeing, as I mentioned, after a couple of days, points from players about being kicked from the groups for being augmentation evokers because they were saying I did low damage. Players complaining that they were being kicked as augmentation due to being bad at the game because, you're doing less damage than a healer and you were invited to be a DPS. Why are you doing so little damage? That might be something that becomes a little bit more of a problem. Mythic Plus is the largest activity at the end game. It is still, of course, larger than Mythic Raiding. It has way more of a casual player base. It's of course done way more by pugs, and you don't get to check the logs while you're running a Mythic Plus key. At the very best, you will go and check the logs after the key. So throughout the entirety of your run, you will never get to see exactly how you are doing as an evoker. You can only guess, Maybe, I remember this dungeon last time, I think the fire mage did 140k DPS on this boss. I think that's the number I should go for on this boss this time with a different fire mage. That's the best you can do as an augmentation evoker in Mythic Plus while you are currently doing the key, before you have time to go and check the logs. That seems to be the main issue right now when it comes to these specs, the massive difference you have from the damage shown in game versus the damage shown outside of the game. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it an improvement? Did I play better this key? It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell now because the augmentation evoker is in the group jumbling up all of the numbers, and now it makes it much more difficult to realize how things went in the key. I think likely the best solution to not annoy either side of this question is to allow combat log add-ons to have an option to show or not show Augmentation Evoker contribution. So allow the combat log hooks to be read by details, for example, so that you can now see the Augmentation Evoker doing its real damage in game and keep it as an option. You can even keep the default damage to show as buffs to other players, and then you can tick this tiny little box to be able to see the damage done by the Augmentation Evoker as the damage done by itself and not as a buff. I think this would be the best solution, to simply come up with an option, an alternative to also allow players to see the real, let's just call it the true damage of an Augmentation Evoker in-game as well. Otherwise, we will have to keep dragging this on for days and weeks until Blizzard comes up with an answer to this, because I feel like it's going to continue to annoy / frustrate / disappoint some players whenever they enter a Mythic Plus key or a raid and they don't quite have an idea of how well they are performing, because it's quite difficult to do so. If you are with an Augmentation Evoker in your group, you never quite know how much the impact of this evoker is going to be for you and for the other DPS specs. This is the point for today. This is the debate for today. I would like to know your guys' answers on this. On which side of the damage shown are you at right now? If you are on the third party side of things, showing the actual damage of the evoker, or if you are on the show the damage of the evoker as buffs to the other player's side, which is what we currently have in game. As I said, my side is just come up with both, just allow both of these to be shown, to be visible, so you can just choose which one do you want to see. Do you want to see the evoker damage or the evoker buffs? It's up to you. I think that would be the cleaner solution. So with this question, I'm gonna leave you to the rest of the beginning of your weekend on this Friday. We are thanking, of course, as usual, all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, but also thanking everyone who has done it for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. With these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, let's come up with some spoilers for this weekend. This might be the more unbalanced patch we have had in recent memory.